The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Before we get started, we want to do a quick sound check to make sure that you can hear me speaking. So if you can hear me speaking, could you please raise your hand? That lets us know that the audio is working. Great. You can go ahead and lower your hands if you raise them, as we will use that function when we start asking for stakeholder feedback. Welcome and thank you for attending the New Colorado Office of Radon Professionals stakeholder meeting via webinar today. It is February 22nd, 2022, and the time is 10 a.m. Before we get started, we would like to introduce the staff members from the Division of Professions and Occupations that are present. My name is Darcy Magnuson, and I'm a regulatory analyst with the division. Also attending is Tony Cummings, Senior Program Director, and Elena Kemp, Regulatory Coordinator. Due to concerns surrounding COVID-19, the division has transitioned to a platform that is 100% virtual, and we appreciate your flexibility. As you may or may not have attended DORA stakeholder meetings before, we would like to emphasize the importance of your comments today. DORA makes decisions every day that may affect your life and your business, so your input is vital in the rulemaking process. Throughout this process, our goal is to create regulations that clarify and explain legislation, ensure minimum competency to enter and continue to practice, and provide only what is absolutely necessary for consumer protection without creating unnecessary barriers to the marketplace. Your input will be part of the information that goes to the director, as the director considers what rules should be promulgated to implement Colorado House Bill 21-1195 concerning the regulation of radon professionals and, in connection therewith, requiring licensure to practice as a radon measurement professional or radon mitigation professional. The effective date for the adopted rules and deadline for all radon measurement and radon mitigation professionals to become licensed is July 1st, 2022. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the program's website by the close of business on Tuesday. As this stakeholder meeting is held solely by webinar, please raise your hand by using the hand icon if you would like to speak, and we will unmute your line so you will be heard by everyone. Or you can type your comment in the question section and we will read it aloud. Before we start taking comments, we ask that anyone providing comments please state your name and the name of the organization that you represent if you are representing an organization. Feel free to provide either general comments on the rule changes or specific comments on the proposed language. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 to 5 minutes and try not to repeat something that was already said. Stating you're in full agreement with someone else works just fine and will be noted. If you are using audio through your computer, please remember to put any phones on vibrate or turn them off. And whether you are using computer or phone audio, try to keep background noises to a minimum when speaking. So just quickly, we are showing on the screen the draft proposed rules that we are taking comments on today. If you haven't been able to look through them, I'm assuming that you have since you're on this meeting here today, but for future reference, all of the information about stakeholder meetings, rulemaking hearings, program information will be posted on the program's website. So on the DORA Division of Professions and Occupations website under Radon Professionals. And then for everything related to rulemaking, that's all included under the Public Notices tab. And so that's where you will be able to find the recording from today's meeting, also and we're showing it right now. You can find the draft rules there. We always include the legislation if there is legislation. So just wanted to flag that for you so that you know where to find everything moving forward. So at this point in time, we are going to ask for stakeholder feedback regarding the proposed changes. And like I said, you can raise your hand, not proposed changes, proposed new rules. You can raise your hand and we will unmute your line, or you can use the question function on the webinar and type in written questions or comments, and then we'll read those for other members who are participating as well as the recording. Okay. I see Dan Stevenson. You're self-muted. When you unmute, we should be able to hear you. Dan Stevenson? Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is actually Rafe. Dan is here with me, and I'm with Drennan Custom Contracting. And forgive me, several of the questions I have are questions that have arisen in our conversations recently. I read this bill when it came out back in July and haven't reread since then. My sort of our company's main concern is, as we look at becoming a licensed state, is really about enforcement of rules. All of the the rules and regulations that we currently understand to be in effect as of July are rules and regulations we already follow or are very happy to adopt and follow. But some of those regulations relative to how things are done or what materials might be used certainly are going to increase costs that we would need to pass along to our customers. But if we're doing them and there are other companies, licensed or otherwise, who are not actually doing those, there's going to be an impact to our bottom line and makes it harder for us to function in the marketplace as a viable entity. So I'm just curious what you all are thinking about currently regarding enforcement of the regulations.
So I guess my question is, do you have specific rules that are included in these new draft proposed rules that you're concerned about? That would help me know a little bit more about where your concerns are coming from.
Yeah, for example, regulations around electrical.
And is that within this, like, if you can give us a rule number, that helps so that we can go there and talk about it.
Okay, yeah, give me a minute to scan over them and then I'll jump back in.
Okay, perfect. I'll go ahead and lower your hand, and then if you want to re-raise your hand when you're ready, then we can work that way. While we do that, I have Crystal, I believe it's Crystal Little. We should be able to hear you.
Hi, I wanted to speak to that. I worked on this process from the inception. Speaking to his comments, I think from what I'm understanding is you're looking to use materials that aren't ANSI approved, and I think that's what the purpose of this bill is, to make sure that everybody will be following suit and using our ANSI standards to use the proper materials involved. I think the enforcement that we had looked at is working with DORA and CDPHE with a reporting system to start. I know long-term plans are to potentially adopt the ARST inspector certification here in Colorado. So I think to begin this bill, we don't have enforcement set in place in inception, but we are looking to promote that in the future. So hopefully that answers his questions.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I think that this was a good place to talk about this opportunity. This forum can be helpful, I think, for stakeholders to communicate back and forth as well. So I appreciate you raising your hand and sharing that. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute, and then if you want to say anything else, just raise your hand again. I'm going to hop, I see there's someone else with a hand raised, but I'm going to hop back to, I know you said you're not Dan Stevenson, but that's how it shows up on my screen. You're self-muted. We should be able to hear you now.
Yeah, okay, it's Rafe, R-A-F-E, so thank you. I'm not smart enough to be able to listen and scan to these things at the same time. So the one that pops up in mind is like, the 6 mil membrane, for example. A 6 mil membrane is more expensive as we look through all of our providers than like a 3 mil cross laminated membrane is, for example. And so I'm just thinking about, we go into a customer's house and we say, look, we're following the rules and regulations. We're going to put in 6 mil. As a result, it's going to be, this is how much this is going to cost. And then we have a competitor that goes in that's using the 3 mil barrier. They're going to beat us on cost every time. And so that's just my concern, is that if there's not a mechanism of enforcement of the regulations, either nobody's going to follow them because the market is really driving what people are going to do, or the people that are following them are going to, kind of fall by the wayside as they become less competitive.
Okay, thank you. I see you muted yourself. I'll place you back on mute and lower your hand, and then I see Crystal Little raised her hand again. So I'm going to unmute you. We should be able to hear you, Crystal.
Yeah, so Ray, I understand what you're saying, and that was the purpose of bringing this bill to fruition. We're trying to eliminate the folks that aren't doing things properly. As far as the enforcement goes, there is a form that you can complete, I believe, for DORA and CDPHE that can report those folks that aren't doing it. That's the whole purpose of this bill, was to make sure we're doing it right. And we are following, as you can see on the screen right now, we are following the ANSI R standards. So anybody who is performing work needs to be licensed in Colorado, and they need to follow the ANSI standards. So I think if we all start, the folks that are on this call or involved in the process, follow these rules, I think we lead by example. And there are things in place to combat those folks that are undercutting and doing those things, not using the proper materials. We're trying to save people's lives and lower radon, and the only way to do that is by the research that we've had over the last 30 years that shows us the correct way to do things, and that's outlined in the ANSI standard. So hopefully that helps as well.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that as well, so within the division, we are complaint driven. So that means that if there's a concern that a licensed professional is not following the rules, regulations, statutes of the program or board, then you can submit a complaint that will be investigated by the division, and then ultimately the director would determine whether that person violated the statutes or the rules. So I'm going to go to Richard Moody. We should be able to hear you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Richard Moody here, Regional Manager with SWAT Environmental. This document refers a lot to a director and, the power that they're going to have. Do we know who's going to be the director of this? Are they a radon professional?
So the director is the director of the Division of Professions and Occupations, and that's Ronnie Hines.
Okay. Yeah, because it, it just looks like in this form he has a lot of, authority to review complaints, petitions, and those kind of things. Just want to make sure that person is going to be well versed in the radon standards and, kind of understand what we go through in the industry.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute, and then lower your hand if you want to provide any additional comment. You're welcome to do that. We also received a written question from John Cardos. Is there going to be any statewide effort to inform the home builders in this state that these rules will be mandatory? I've talked to several that have no idea that this is coming and will be mandatory. So thank you for flagging that for us. We can definitely look into how to make sure that people know about this new legislation and these rules. The next person that I see is Douglas Clatter. Yourself, there we go, we should be able to hear you.
Very good, thank you. My question is applicability specifically to new home construction, where various elements of a mitigation system are installed by different trades during construction and covered by local codes that have been adopted? How does this apply to the flat worker who may be caulking slabs or installing poly under slab during new construction? And as an ancillary to that is that our standards may be in conflict with the codes that have been adopted locally dealing with radon mitigation, specifically in new building construction.
So I can only speak to the individuals that will be required to be licensed under the division. So if they're not required to be licensed, then these rules wouldn't be applicable to them. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, not really, because there's various elements. So you're saying that the way you're interpreting the legislation is that everybody who touches any part of a mitigation scheme have to be licensed by DORA?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that as far as jurisdiction is concerned, we only have jurisdiction over the folks that are doing the work that require the licensure in Colorado. So if they're doing something that doesn't require them to be licensed, then we wouldn't have jurisdiction. If they're practicing unlicensed and they should be licensed, then we would also have jurisdiction over that, where a cease and desist order could be issued.
So what takes precedence, the DORA regulations here versus local codes, local building codes?
I'd have to actually see what you're talking about to see if there's a conflict. It sounds like you're saying there is a conflict. So my suggestion to you would be that if you do think that the way the rules are currently drafted and being proposed, and you see something there that conflicts with local codes, my recommendation would be to email us at the rulemaking inbox, which is listed on the notice for today's meeting, and it's DORA_DPO_rulemaking at state.co.us, so that we can take a look at that and present that to the director during this process to make sure that these rules are not in conflict, and then go from there. So that'd be my recommendation.
That was part of the written comments I've already sent in.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have Israel Solis.
Yes, I'm here from Bell, Colorado. I'm with Stanton Engineering. And for the question of Doug, I see that happening in the new construction industry all the time. The concrete guys do the vapor barrier, and they just don't do it in the way we do it. So if they're touching the radon mitigation system installation and they're not part of, or they don't call themselves professionals on radon, then this rule doesn't apply to them, correct?
So that would, it would be potentially, I mean, it depends on the practice of, this is outlined in statute, what radon professionals can do. And so the question will be if they're doing unlicensed practice, then that'll be a question for the director.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and go to some written questions. So we received a written question from CJ Jarecki. Can we receive an updated copy of these rules? And so the most current copy of the rules will be posted on the program's website, which we showed earlier under the public notices tab. It'll be linked there, and you can review the rules there, or you can always email us at the email address that I mentioned, and we can send you a copy as well. Another written comment question from John Ciambello. Will homebuyers and or their realtor be allowed to do their own testing with charcoal canisters as they have been doing? I don't know the answer to that. It just depends on if it falls within the area of practice. Are they practicing as unlicensed professionals? I personally don't know the question of that, but we can certainly look into that question. John Cardos, are home builders going to be it's going to be, I can't quite make it out. That was like there's a typo, to use licensed radon pros to install passive systems. required. Our home builder is going to be required to use licensed radon pros to install passive systems. I'm not sure I fully understand that question. If you want to raise your hand and clarify, we can go that route. In the meantime, we do have Kelly Parnioni with a raised hand. We should be able to hear you.
Hi there, this is Kelly Parnagoni with Insight Inspections. We are just on the measurement side of things, not installing mitigation systems, but just doing measurement, typically related to the purchase or sale of a home. When we're applying for a license, we have multiple people within our company that could be placing that radon test. Are we applying for an individual license for each person that would be placing that radon test, or are we applying for a license as a company? And then that would be the umbrella under which everyone operates. Everybody is certified through INTERNACHI, who places these tests, the International Association of Certified Home Inspectors. But how does it work in terms of our license with the state? Do we have to be licensed each as individuals or as a group under a company?
Individual licenses. It won't be tied to a business.
Okay, thanks.
John Cardos, you're self-muted. Since I asked you to follow up, since I wasn't clear on your question, we should be able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I think what everyone is asking is whether or not the home builders in this state are going to be required to use certified licensed radon people to install the passive systems. Because right now it's like the plumber's helper does the piping, the concrete guys throw down whatever underneath the slab, and they're lucky if they get an outlet in the attic, and nobody is inspecting anything or following up at all, making sure that these rules are followed, that they're done correctly. It is just not done. So I think people are wondering whether that's going to actually happen, so that these builders are going to be required to use licensed people.
So the statute, that's House Bill 211195, will define the scope, or does define the scope of radon measurement and radon mitigation and the practice of it in the state of Colorado. So if people are not practicing, or excuse me, are practicing as defined by the statute as a radon professional in the state and they're not licensed, then that could potentially be unlicensed practice, and that would be something that the director would have to handle on a case-by-case basis in Colorado. And Tony, you're welcome to chime in too.
I have a feeling that, there's not going to be a single licensed person installing radon mitigation systems in new construction in this state unless these builders are made aware that they have to use licensed radon mitigators to do that. Otherwise, they're just going to keep going as planned, and that's the way it's been done here for years and years. It's hardly ever a licensed installer that's installing these passive systems. We come in after the fact and have to clean up their mess, and I think we're all wondering whether or not, we're going to get hit with 100 million phone calls in June because all these builders are now going to have to use radon people instead of their plumbers and their electricians and whoever else.
I understand, and definitely hear what you're saying. And I know, Tony, you wanted to weigh in too from the division. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute, Mr. Cardos, and lower your hand, but feel free to raise your hand or type in another question if you would like to say anything else.
Yeah, so I think, this is Tony Cummings again, I'm a senior program director. I think if you read the statute, there's exemptions in the statute. So one of the exemptions is if they're licensed and certified to do that particular type of work. If they're not, right, another exemption exists where they can have a radon professional present and that professional can supervise the installation of that. So I think that may be, kind of an answer to your question. If, a vapor barrier is part of a radon system or radon mitigation system, then they're going to, I believe the intent of the statute is that they must have somebody present to supervise that installation of that vapor barrier, amongst other things, if that answers the question. For the previous question about realtors being able to, measure for their own radon, I think if you read the definition of what radon measurement is, that's not going to be allowed anymore, because that definition is the placement of a measurement device for the presence of radon. Does that semi-answer question?
While we do that, Tony, I'm going to get to some other people,
Sure.
And then we have a number of people with your hands raised, so we're not overlooking you. We're trying to get to everyone. Israel Solis said, will this rules be enforced to every county or only the counties that decide to adopt them? This is statewide, so these regulations will apply to everyone in the state of Colorado who is practicing as a radon professional. It's not going to be county by county. So I'm going to take another comment. Luke Grease, you're self-muted. We should be able to hear you now.
Yep. So I'm Luke Grease with Scott Home Inspection out of Berthoud, Colorado. We're coming to this from the measurement side of things. So I understand that each of our individual inspectors who is NRPP certified will also have to apply with you for licensing to perform radon testing. That's correct?
Correct.
Is there a fee for that? Has that fee been set for that license?
Tony, do you want to weigh in on that one?
I don't believe the fees are final, but there will be a fee, yes.
Okay. And then my other question has to do with the insurance requirements. It states that everybody has to carry insurance. If we're all licensed individually, our company has a blanket policy for all of our inspectors. It doesn't name the individual inspectors. Will you be able to accept that we just have one insurance policy that covers all of our employees for this situation?
That's a good question. Elaine is trying to get to the place in the rules so that we can see that, but we could flag that as a question comment about liability insurance. Okay. Do you have any other questions or
No,
is that it? Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute and lower your hand. Crystal Little said in response to Tony's comment that homeowners can test their own home but must disclose if radon is found high, and real estate professionals in a real estate transaction should be done by a professional. We have a couple people we haven't heard from yet. I know there are some people that we've heard from already, so I'm going to keep getting through the people that we haven't heard from, and then we'll go back to individuals that have additional comments. So Marcy Weatherly, we should be able to hear you.
Hi, Marcy Weatherly, Town of Erie. I'm wondering if there are any plans for state permitting or state inspecting of radon systems to go along with this licensing requirement.
That would be a question that would require legislative changes. So as far as this rulemaking, the director is only implementing the current legislation. So I don't know the answer to that question. Russell LaPlante. You're self-muted, Russell LaPlante. We should be able to hear you.
Yes. Similar, but not exactly that. So again, there's no enforcement after a mitigation system's been done for an inspection and or post-mitigation testing. I know this last year, most post-tests don't get completed, so they don't even know if the system is working. 4 different inspections this last year with mitigation systems, the radon came back high and the post-test kit is still sitting there. But there's no enforcement of this. It's only going to be complaint driven. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's no inspection authority as far as I understand. Tony, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute and lower your hand. Next, we have Terry Kerwin. You're self-muted, but we should be able to hear you when you unmute. There we go.
Hi, thank you. So to go back to the insurance question, I think if we were
Terry, I'm not sure
could provide the certificate of insurance.
Sorry, I don't know if it was just me,
Sorry?
but your audio cut out, so I didn't hear your question.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I was saying that, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so if we just add or applicant's employer to the insurance language, then we could provide a certification or certificate of insurance for our employees. Because the way it's worded, each licensee would have to have their own insurance policy. That's just a suggestion on my part. And then on the standards that are listed under each measurement and mitigation, you have a mix of standards that are you have some mitigation standards referenced in the measurement section and vice versa. And there's no any quality control standard listed in either of those places. So I would suggest that get looked over and corrected.
Okay. We'll add that comment in to make sure that we capture it so that it gets flagged. If Elena has questions, she'll follow up and make sure we get it included correctly in the document.
Okay, thank you.
I actually do. I just wanted to clarify. I just wanted to clarify your comment as I added in. Can you just kind of summarize that for me again?
Yeah, for the insurance or the standards?
The standards.
Okay, there's mitigation standards referenced under the measurement section of the rules.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And vice versa. There's a measurement standard referenced in the mitigation section of the rules.
Okay.
And there's also a lack of the quality control standard listed for either measurement or mitigation.
Okay, thank you. We can go on to the next comment.
Ready? So I see Julie Irk, your hand is raised. You're self-muted.
Thank you. Good morning. Question to you coming from Arvada. These licenses, are they going to have to be renewable licenses, and how often, if so?
Yes, they will be required to be renewed, and it should be, if I'm not mistaken, Tony, you can correct me, a 2-year renewal cycle.
That's correct.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand and take a written question, and then we'll get back to other folks. If an inspector, this is from Bruce Stanley, if an inspector is certified in the adopted IRC, they are already qualified to inspect according to Appendix F. Are these inspectors automatically licensed since they are certified under the ICC? This is relative to new home construction. Also, what if a municipality has exempted the Appendix F requirements? No one will be automatically licensed with DORA. So if you want to be licensed with us, you would have to submit an application for licensure. I think that should answer your question. If it doesn't, feel free to follow up. And Tony, you're welcome to jump into if I missed anything.
No, I think you got it.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Richard Moody. I see you submitted a written question and your hand is raised, so I've unmuted you. We should be able to hear you.
Thank you. So one of our big questions with this as well is, is certain variances going to be allowed? In my written question brought up an example, if we have a completely exterior system that, and according to this, we have to have an audible alarm installed, if we put an audible alarm outdoors, it's going to fail very shortly. So one thing we're concerned about, and we all deal with it in the radon industry, is if there's certain variances from these standards because of the way the home is built and those things, is there a procedure documentation we need to do with those instances to remain in compliant with these regulations?
That's a good question. As far as I'm aware, there are not variances, but Tony, do you want to say anything else to that?
I don't believe that the statute includes any variances the way it was written.
Because there's always that border between, yeah, it's ideal we do it exactly this way and we want to do it this way, but there will be some circumstances we can't make that happen. So if that's the case, I would like to see a way to get this, how do we make sure we're in compliant and the variances are reasonable and, we're not going to get complaints filed later.
Thank you for raising that concern. And I think that's a good chance for me to just remind folks that, so the purpose of the rulemaking is to implement the statute. So there are things that are in statute that require rulemaking to be done to clarify and explain the legislation, but the director doesn't have authority to change the statute. That would all have to go through the legislative process. So the director's authority is limited to the statutory authority that was granted by the legislature to promulgate rules. So I appreciate you flagging that concern, just wanting to explain the director's limitation in this process. Moving on to Alan Selch. You're self-muted, Alan Selch. We should be able to hear you. Doesn't look like you're talking, but you're unmuted on both ends. So I can't hear you and it doesn't show that you're trying to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute and lower your hand, Alan Selch. If you would like to try again or type in a written question or comment, you could do that as well. Eric Fried, we should be able to hear you. Eric Fried. While we see if you're unmuted on our end, and I don't see they're talking and you're unmuted on your end as well. And then going back to written comments while we wait to see if we can get the audio. Crystal Little, answer to Marcy, yes. RMAARST will be working on future legislation for the inspection certification through AARST. David Hayes, the computer in use has a very low battery. Thank you. Victoria Cardona, for multifamily measurement, can the owner of the property test for a real estate transaction, or would it have to be done by a radon professional only? I think that we did have the answer to that earlier from Crystal Little with respect to a homeowner being able to test, but having to provide notice if must disclose if radon is found high. Work through the rest of these written comments. John Ciambello, in El Paso County, the health department has a real estate kit, 2 canisters for $45 that is sold to the public. Will anyone be informing them of these new regulations? If not, the public will likely not be adhering to these rules out of ignorance. Christine Kelly, TK is specifically referencing the lack of inclusion of the ANSI ARST standards on quality assurance. ANSI ARST MSPC 2015 performance specifications for instrumentation systems designed to measure radon, gas, and air. And ANSI ARST MSPC 2022 performance specifications for instrumentation systems designed to measure radon, gas, and air. And another one in ANSI ARST MSQA 2019, radon measurement systems quality assurance. So Elena, if you want to drop those into the comments, I think that would be helpful. John Cardos, this will change nothing unless it is enforced. Nobody in this state is even aware of this happening besides radon people. How are we going to make sure licensed people are doing the work? Because that's not happening now. If there's no inspection process or a certain number required, it's pointless. And so that's what I mentioned earlier about the division being complaint driven. So if there's a concern that people are practicing as radon professionals who are not licensed, then the division will investigate complaints submitted on a case-by-case basis and determine whether a cease and desist order should be issued. Victoria Cardona, when will the application to get licensed be available? Also, I assume there will be a grace period after July 1st, 2022. How long is that grace period if there is one? Tony, I'll let you speak to the application.
I believe the application should be live next month or at the very latest in April. There will be no grace period, I don't think. Pretty sure there won't be.
Yeah, it's a statutory requirement for licensure. Christine Kelly, the current rules reference the current ANSI ARST standards, but does not allow for the implementation of new revisions. Can this be included, or will the rule need to be revised whenever a newer version of the standards come out? That's a really good question. So if a standard or guideline is incorporated by reference, which is what has been done in these rules, the statute specifically says that you have to include the effective date of the standard or guideline that is being incorporated by reference, which means that if those change, the rules will also need to be updated. So there would be additional rulemaking required. The statute specifically says that you can't include something along the lines of this includes additional or new versions after this date. So good question. Alan Selch, question 1, what are the requirements for licensure? The requirements for licensure are outlined in the statute. So my suggestion would be to look at the statute, and then those will all be captured in the application for licensure that was just talked about. Eric Freed, there is almost no coordination with local governments and almost no education being done for general contractors. Our inspectors will be inspecting for compliance with the 2021 IRC Appendix AF. Why would we need to be licensed? 12-165-107 exempts D, an agent of a federal, state, or local government agency acting within the scope of the agent's official capacity. Plus, we are not acting as either radon mitigation or radon testing professionals. So that's up to you as an individual. If you feel like you don't need to be licensed and an exemption applies to you, then you would determine whether you needed to apply for licensure. So I think that you raise good points. It's a personal, if you think you're practicing and need to be licensed under the statute, then my suggestion would be to apply. But if you think an exemption applies to you, then I don't think you would have to apply. Question 2 from Alan Selch. Are the EPA standards enshrined in the state law, specifically regarding exit points below the roof line because of the vulnerability to being damaged during snow, sledding, or removal? If we haven't included those in and incorporated them by reference, doesn't, I don't know, Tony, if you want to weigh in on that one at all?
I don't believe the statute includes EPA standards.
Okay. Richard Moody, will there be a conflict of interest statement in these rules? There's several companies that do home inspection with radon tests, then send company mitigators to install the system, and finally send their own employers back to test. This is not ideal due to the conflict of interest. We generally do not have conflict of interest provisions within our rules. So again, the rules are promulgated based on what the director's statutory authority is to promulgate rules. So I do not anticipate there will be conflict of interest language within the rules. John Ciambello, what kind of fines will there be if someone does the measurement without being properly licensed? So if someone isn't licensed, as required by the statute, the remedy is for the director to issue a cease and desist order. So there wouldn't be a fine. Crystal Little, EPA standards no longer exist. EPA refers to ARST ANSI standards. Thank you for that comment. Christine Kelly, the EPA radon measurement and mitigation standards have been rescinded by the EPA. The EPA currently references the ANSI and ARST standards. Thank you for those comments. I'm going to jump back to folks with raised hands. Eric Freed, you're unmuted and on our end and your end. So it doesn't look like we've been able to hear you. Crystal Little, I'm going to unmute you. We should be able to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was from the last one. The
No
EPA
worries.
standards.
Okay, thank you. Douglas Clatter, you're self-muted. We should be able to hear you now.
Okay. Two things. Going back to a comment that Tony made regarding new construction, which is going to be, you know, as everybody's asked questions, is going to be interesting. Where I think Tony said oversight of portions of the system being installed would be one approach. I would ask, would oversight also be supplanted by inspection of the final system by a licensed mitigation professional to allow the trades to do this, provided it is inspected? Or so does oversight mean on the premises, or is it inspection? That's one question. And then the second question is on the requirements for certification. I believe it says that one must be certified by NRPP or NRSP. If a person loses that certification, do they lose their license within the state of Colorado? And when they renew their license, is continued certification a requirement?
So the answer to your first question is direct supervision is the on-site supervision of activities, if that makes sense. It's defined in statute. And then the renewal period, if they don't have a certification, they will not be able to renew their license.
But would they lose their certification in the midst of, I mean, if the timing is obviously different between NRPP and the state. So if their NRPP certification lapses, they are no longer licensed by the state, or is there some notification from those agencies in order to maintain that license?
So I'm not aware currently of them notifying us of a lapse in certification.
But I think that's something that we can certainly look into, right? Since this is a new program that's being set up and regulated, that's certainly something that could be communicated between the state and the certifying body. Because I hear your concerns that it's a requirement for licensure, but if they don't have that, and how would the state know if it happens in the middle of a licensure cycle? So I definitely hear your concerns.
Right. Well, and you've identified 2 certification agencies, and I think I've heard somebody in this call already mention the 3rd one, Internachi, but that's not recognized in the current legislation.
Correct. And as I say, I see Crystal Little. We should be able to hear you if you wanted to weigh in.
Sure. So, Doug, to answer your questions as far as the certification and moving forward for every 2 years, the plan is to work with Ronnie at DORA through ARST. ARST is willing to put forth updates on license as we go, our certifications as we go. I think that's something that we're working towards, working with ARST and DORA to know if it's an active certification or not. And as far as, what was the second question? Internachi. As we were only recognizing when we wrote this bill that was approved through evaluation of the 2 programs, it was recognized that ARST and NRSB, because they both recognize the ARST ANSI standards, were the approved certifying bodies. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Well, I think there's an aspect within the legislation that would allow another body to apply for recognition.
Sure, they can absolutely apply for recognition, but as it stands today, from when this bill was enacted, there's only 2 approved certifying bodies, and that is ARST and NRSB, NRPP and NRSB.
All right. Thank you both. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute. Lower your hands. Russell LaPlante. We should be able to hear you once you unmute.
Yes. So an earlier comment and questions got me a little concerned. So I was involved in some of the earlier conversations before this bill got passed, and along with Crystal, and a gentleman from another state that had implemented this same type of legislation cautioned us to not necessarily overreach, and I can't say I know the exact conversation, but basically what ended up getting into and being passed, they basically ended up not having enough professionals to meet the needs of the consumer. And specifically, I'm a property inspection company, and we do our own radon testing. And the concern is that one of your answers was that every individual has to register with the state, and therefore they all have to be certified. So multi-inspection companies like myself and many others that I know Scott as well, every employee that places a radon would have to be certified and get a permit through Colorado. And I think I would consider that a bit of an overreach. And I would think you would want to have a company be able to register. And I will say it's very similar to having somebody on site, one person who is the mitigator you have one person that's in a team, but not everybody on the team has to be certified. And I will make a big distinction between testing, which obviously has to be done right, is not the same rocket science on placement. If you've got your quality controls in there and you've educated your employees, they should not necessarily need to be certified as long as the company is and they've got the quality assurance practice. And I also don't think that each individual should need to register. I think what you might end up with is unintended consequences of companies getting out of the mitigation industry, or the testing industry right now, which is done a lot by inspectors, and just going, now you don't have enough testing companies to meet the needs, or it drives the cost of the test up. And that just might be unintended consequences that end up, because I know that I've already heard some inspection companies say if this is too rigid, they'll just get out of it. They'll just stop doing it.
So, okay, there was a lot there. I just wanted to say, so we can't, first off, as the division, we can't provide advice, any type of legal advice for what you should do. According to the statute, the license will apply to an individual. There's no statutory authority for us to license a company. The question is for you and your company and the people who work for you is looking at the scope of practice and determining whether what the people are doing need to be licensed. Are they practicing as a radon professional or mitigation specialist within Colorado? If they are, then you need to determine whether they need to be licensed based on the work that they're doing. We will then, if, like I said, complaint driven, if someone's practicing and is not licensed, then the director would determine whether to take action at that point in time. So hopefully that helps answer your questions. And then, like Tony flagged earlier, there are the exemptions in statute as well to requiring a license. So then you would also have to determine whether the work that you're doing falls into a statutory exemption that makes licensure not required.
So based on that answer, what I'm hearing is that even if you're a mitigation and you've got a crew of 4 people, all 4 people need to be certified and all 4 people need to be registered with the state, even though they're just an employee, a contractor.
So again, we can't advise you, but if someone is practicing within the scope of practice in Colorado, then that person would need to be licensed. All right, so let me hop back to, looks like we have some other people. Crystal Little, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in.
Yep, sure do. So Russell, I understand what you're coming from in that call that we had with the person you're referencing for the bill in Kentucky. So basically, we don't know what people are going out there and doing, right? And they're acting on behalf of themselves if they're out putting a test. I mean, there's a lot of insurance that needs to come through with someone putting, I mean, this is a health risk, right? So the intention is to make sure that the person that is putting the test down has a license attached to the work that they're doing because it is a health risk. So when we went back and forth with different parts of this in inception, it was discussed that yes, we think that each person shall be licensed because they need to be held accountable for the work that they're doing. And the only way to do that is to attach them to a license and to be able to track that. So that's the biggest reason that we went that direction. We want to make sure that the people doing the work know what they're doing. And if they're under a company, they could say they know what they're doing, but then they go out there and they don't know what they're doing. We're trying to stop that inconsistency. And we really feel it's important that everybody be licensed to be practicing in the state of Colorado. That's going to eliminate a lot of the issues and the malintent that we had in the past.
Thank you for that. And we did put we are showing the exemptions, the statutory exemptions on the screen. But again, my recommendation would be to take a look at that and take a look at the scope of practice, and then make a determination on an individual basis as to whether you think you need to be licensed. I'm going to go back to some written comments that we received. Richard Moody, will advanced certifications be required for commercial, multi-family, or new construction installations and testing? Tony, do you want to say anything to that? I don't know that that applies.
I don't think it applies.
Richard Moody, doesn't it state on the screen that an assistant can help with an install as long as they are under direct supervision of a licensed professional? That means we can have helper laborers on site with the certified technicians. I think that's what we were just talking about with the exemptions. So again, take a look at those statutory exemptions and determine whether they apply to you and the work that you're doing. Terry Kerwin, there are lower level certifications through the NRPP for both measurement and mitigation for helpers that work under a person with a professional level certification. Douglas Clatter, the question revolves around the definition of direct supervision, on-site or responsible. So it sounds like you're saying that there needs to be some additional clarification on what direct supervision is. So Elena, will you add a comment in for that? And then while we do that, I'm going to go back to Julie Irk. I see your hand is raised. I've unmuted you.
Hi, thanks. Just to clarify, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. This is all going to be complaint driven. Then, and if I'm understanding that correctly, how are you expecting those complaints to come through, and how long do you expect the length of time of those complaints to be enforced? You know, will it be weeks? Is the job now going to have to be on hold until someone comes and verifies? Or, I mean, what's the process if it really is just complaint driven?
So it is complaint driven. The entire division is complaint driven, with the exception of inspector. So there are some boards and programs that have inspection authority. So when the division receives a complaint, and if it's a licensed person, the licensed person is notified, and depending on the nature of the complaint, given an amount of time to respond, and then the director investigates that, and then makes a decision based on that. So that's how the complaint process works. And those complaints are received online through our complaint submission function. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but as far as like the project stopping and until the director has made a decision, it's under investigation with our division.
Thank you. That does make sense. It just seems like a process like this shouldn't be just solely complaint driven. There's got to be a way to educate people about what's going on rather than waiting until someone comes and finds out they're doing something wrong. Sorry, just my thoughts.
No, that's fine. I understand. Alrighty, I'm going to place you back on mute and lower your hand. Bob Cadera, you're self-muted. We should be able to hear you now.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to go back to Russell's concern, and Terry came back and kind of clarified. So there's supposed to be different levels of certification, and I wanted to see if there's any information about how those levels will work together. In other words, do we have to have a high-level person in the company? Do we have to have that high-level person setting the measurement device? How does that work?
I see Crystal Little has her hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. I assume that you wanted to chime in on.
Yeah, I can chime in on Bob, but I can also chime on the certification. ARST is working on a inspector certification currently. It's being done in Illinois, and it's getting ready to roll out into Kentucky. And we are hoping that we can have that happen here in Colorado. So I know that this is a process, and I think that's what we need to remember is this is a process. We've got the first bill passed. Now we're going to go back and we can get the second legislative process started, which is awareness, as well as inspection and the inspection of the systems. And we're not there yet. So, this took 5 years to get this process done. So bear with us as we maneuver through this together, and there will be, some inspection processes here, hopefully in the near future. As far as Bob's question, the levels can be found, again, we're following ARST ANSI standards, and ARST and NRPP just went through and redid their certification process to make it easier for everyone involved. And there's different levels, and you can go on to the NRPP website, and that's where you'll be able to find the different levels of testing as well as mitigation, more following the lines of like an electrician, like an apprentice, and in that sense. When we talk about the direct supervision, the intent of that from the committee and legislative group that we had, it was to be on site to monitor and sign off on it and to be able to accept responsibility. So that's the direction that we were going in. So hopefully that answers 3 questions.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to some written questions that I think also pertain to what we've been talking about. Douglas Clatter, since NRPP certification is a prerequisite, which certification will be required, technician or specialist? And then Terry Kerwin also said refer to ARST and ANSI standards. Back to other people with hands raised. Richard Moody, I have unmuted you.
So in the, to kind of clarify, I guess, some more, because, the NCR standards do state you can only have so many radon technicians under a radon mitigation specialist over review. So, it is going to increase a lot of costs for everybody if we have to have one mitigation specialist. And I want to say it's for every 6 or 4 mitigation technicians in overview and things like that. So that's going to be a very interesting process to keep, 4 people, 4 or 6 technicians under one radon mitigation specialist. And just going to be a very interesting process.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute and lower your hand. As of right now, it looks like we've gotten to everybody that wanted to provide comments. We'll continue to stay on for a little bit longer and monitor to see if anyone else wants to weigh in. Christine Kelly. Looks like you raised and lowered your hand. So if you would like to say anything else, please raise your hand again. All right, you're self-muted, Christine Kelly. If you want to say anything, you can unmute and we should be able to hear you.
Sorry, it was just an oops.
Okay, no worries. Jeanette Whitcomb, will there be any responsibility for the local health departments with this regulation? So DORA doesn't have any jurisdiction over the local health departments. So I'm not sure if that helps answer your question, but as far as these rules and regulations that are being considered by the director, there is no jurisdiction for the director to do anything as it relates to the local health departments. Thank you for the comment, Christine Kelly. Douglas Platter, will the applications being established by April, excuse me, I mispronounced that. With the applications being established by April, the question of which level of certification as a prerequisite is critical. Brian Coy, I see your hand is raised. We should be able to hear you, Brian Coy.
Hi, this is Brian Coy, president of Rocky Mountain ARST. So with the certification levels, you know, Terry and I looked at it, and from our understanding, if you are a mitigation professional, the standard says that you, even as a technician level certification, you have to work under the direct supervision of a specialist, whereas with measurement, you can have the technician level certification and not be under the direct supervision. You just have to have a specialist within the company to perform your QA/QC protocols and things like that. So I think, you know, some of these questions are best answered by a fundamental understanding of the standards. And then, you know, one of the questions I had about enforcement on the complaint-based system is, it sounds like the director will be evaluating each complaint individually and things like that. Are they going to be qualified to make any kind of judgment calls on if it's a valid complaint or not? Like, are they going to be certified and have that knowledge?
Yes, so the director is most certainly qualified, and then the division also has the ability to hire experts if there's a question as well.
Okay. And then in the actual legislative bill, it does have a section in there that says that sanctions will include fines. And earlier you mentioned that there was no fine for infractions. Can you clarify that?
You're correct. So if someone is practicing as an unlicensed professional, then the only remedy is to issue a cease and desist order, and there's no authority to fine. Now, a licensed professional, there is a statutory authority to fine. So that's the difference there.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Now, I know that there's a number of people on this call who submitted written comments ahead of this meeting. Are we going to receive replies to those comments individually?
You should have received an acknowledgement that the comment was received, and then all of those comments will be posted on the program's website for others to review and to look at. And then ultimately what will happen before the director adopts these rules or makes any modifications to these rules based on stakeholder comments, she will have a chance to review all of those, since she is the decision maker in this process. So.
Great.
Thank you. I see John Cardos, your hand is raised. You're unmuted.
Good. So I don't feel like I got a straight answer. As far as I'm aware, every new home being built is going to have to be built with radon resistant new construction. Is that correct?
I don't know the answer to that question.
No, I thought that was part of this whole process, making the state regulated, was that would mean that builders had to use licensed people for all of the work relating to radon that they're going to be doing. Because right now, builders just hire whoever they have there to install the passive mitigation systems. They're not using licensed people. And that would be something that would change huge, it would change the business in this state quite a bit. But I don't think, they're aware that if they're having people installing radon equipment, that it has to be installed by licensed people. And if nobody is following up with them to make sure that they're using licensed people, how is any of this ever going to be enforced?
And so I think that question is a little bit different than the way I understood it initially. So if someone is practicing under the scope as defined by statute, then they have to be licensed. If they're not licensed, then the division is complaint driven, and the director will take action if someone is engaging in unlicensed practice.
So you're going to go after not the builders for hiring their plumber to install the passive mitigation system. You're going to go after the plumber for being hired to install the passive mitigation system?
It would be over the individual. So whoever's practicing, because the statute is regarding individuals. So if someone is engaging in unlicensed practice, then that person could potentially be issued a cease and desist order by the division.
So how is anybody supposed to know this? Because I've literally been calling around to builders this entire year asking them if they knew anything about the changes coming for 2022, and none of them have heard a single thing about it at all. None of them are aware they have to use licensed people. None of the people they're using are aware they have to be licensed. And nobody is inspecting the passive systems that are being installed in this state right now. They're not inspected at all. They're just thrown in haphazardly, and you get what you get and you don't throw a fit because nobody has any recourse against any of these people. And nobody, I mean, I don't understand who's going to tell these builders that they have to do this and who's going to follow up to make sure that they are, because right now none of that's happening. And it doesn't look like anybody has any plans for that to happen. And if nobody's checking, then it's not going to happen.
I hear you. Christine Kelly, I think, wants to weigh in as well on your comments. So I've unmuted you. We should be able to hear you.
Marcy. Thank you. So, John, first of all, this is not a statewide RRNC requirement that all houses have to have radon systems in them. It is still a local code adoption. So if the city or county adopts Appendix F of the International Residential Code, then it'll be required. We've got like 60 cities and counties that currently require it and others that are looking at it. So this is not by any means a statewide Appendix F quote unquote requirement. There is education going out to builders. CDPHE, we do webinars, we do all kinds of training courses for builders, and there has been outreach to the Colorado Builders Association about this new law. But like anything new, it takes a while to get, through. I mean, everybody's got to,
I don't see the benefit for mitigators in this state to this actually happening. It seems like we've got more regulations, we've got more licensing, but we're not going to get any more work out of it. It's not going to mean that builders or anyone else are required to use radon people. You're putting more burden on radon mitigation here, but we're not getting any benefit out of it.
If you could let me finish, please. This law will require that the people installing systems in new builds, if they're doing radon mitigation systems, passive or active, doesn't matter. They're going to need to be licensed by the state of Colorado.
Okay. And is there going to be an inspector that when they're doing the inspection for the foundation and for the plumbing and for the everything else, that they're going to say, let me see the license number for your radon person?
That is not DORA's responsibility. That's the inspectors, the local code officials' inspection process of the new builds.
And are they aware that they need to be checking to make sure that they're using licensed people and that they're inspecting the systems properly?
We have been doing outreach from CDPHE to local code officials to let them know about this new requirement.
Okay. Because I've been doing a lot of local research too. I've been calling builders and talking to people, and nobody has any idea that anything nobody knows anything about it. Everybody is.
Well, and for those of you that are in the field, meeting these people face to face, feel free to share the information about this new law with them, because it's coming. It's coming July 1st, and we're doing all we can at CDPHE to educate builders and code officials, because we know this is going to impact new builds. But it's going to take time. Everything new takes time, and it's an important thing we've needed for a long time in this state, and I'm proud of DORA for taking the lead on it.
Yeah. So June 2nd. Are the inspectors in this state, before they pour a concrete slab, are they going to be inspecting to make sure that there's vapor matting or piping installed before they do that? And then once the riser goes up, they're going to be inspecting that, and then they're going to be looking for licensing numbers and all that?
Again, that's under the enforcement of the local code officials, city or county code officials. That's nothing that we or DORA have any responsibility over. The inspections are the responsibility of the local code officials.
Are they supposed to be doing that as of June 2nd?
I don't know what June 2nd is, but
That's the day after this enforcement takes place. I'm
well,
wondering if
it's July 1st.
July,
But
so July 2nd then.
But they are supposed to do that. I mean, they're supposed to be inspecting the homes. That's part of what the code inspectors do. So it doesn't have anything to do with the date of implementation of this bill.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. And I think we've heard the concerns from you, Mr. Cardos. So I'm going to move on to someone else just to make sure that we get to everybody. So I see Brian. Well, we have some written comments too. I want to make sure we get to everyone. So I have Brian Coy. Your hand is raised. You're unmuted. We should be able to hear you.
So, John's concerns around, getting the word out to these code officials and things like that. That's something that Rocky Mountain Arts has been working pretty hard on doing. We've been in direct contact with City and County of Denver, and there's a group of us working with City and County of Denver to get them educated. We've provided them with training classes and things like that so that they can improve their inspection processes. We're working with the planning department to incorporate better planning and things like that. As far as educating builders, Doug Clatter's having a class on March 22nd, and Rocky Mountain Arts is working with the HBA to provide training to the builders through the HBA and trying to get the word out. And, this is one of those things that, it's going to take all of us to try and get the education out there. We're working really hard as an organization to try and help facilitate this and make it as smooth as possible. So, any insight or help that you could lend to the chapter so that we can, identify who needs to be educated and things like that. We are definitely all ears and trying to figure out the best method of conveying what's going on. But there's a lot of us that are working on trying to get the word out and educate the builders and the code officials and things like that. Ultimately the code officials, it's not necessarily in their purview to, check for licenses on the radon, but that's definitely something that we can raise as a topic of conversation with them. So far, building departments aren't all that receptive to help because they already know everything, but it's something that we can work on together. So, John, if you'd like to reach out, and have a conversation about this after this meeting, I'm happy to meet with you and talk about, ways that we can work together to make this work to all of our benefit. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also see Crystal Little, so I'm going to unmute you. And we have about 7 minutes left. Just want to be mindful of people's time. We can stay later if necessary, but I would like to be mindful since we scheduled this until 11:30. So, Crystal, we'll hear you.
Thank you. I just want to make the comment that we did meet with the Home Builders Association through this process. They were very instrumental in this bill design, and they are going to work with their home builders to get this message spread. They have a full-time lobbyist who actually is in charge of getting this information to their folks. So I know that the process has been going on for the last 3 years. So as far as the builders go, I think that they are becoming more and more aware, as Chris Kelly and Brian Coy just said.
Thank you. Marcy Weatherly, we should be able to hear you.
Marcy Weatherly, Town of Erie. On that same note of the local building inspectors, I think part of that disconnect is if the municipality has not adopted Appendix F, then they are not typically inspecting radon. It's not a requirement, so that's not something that they would typically look at. So that is going to be part of that, trying to get them to add something in that they're not already doing. Most of us are understaffed and just don't have time for additional stuff.
Thank you. I'm going to move to some written comments. Richard Moody, maybe we can have Home Builders Association of Metro Denver, North Colorado, and South Colorado to help get the word out to builders. Eric Freed, I don't think the bill or proposed rules require all homes have a passive or active radon mitigation system installed, only that if they are installed, the radon mitigation and testing professionals must be licensed. IRC appendices only apply if specifically adopted, as in Larimer County and Fort Collins. Most cities and counties do not adopt Appendix F. Sean Wilford, comment only. Sean Wilford, International Radon Association. Municipal governments, inspection bodies should be notified of the state licensure. John Ciambello, where will this document that is on the screen be posted? So the proposed rules are posted on the program's website. So the Radon Professionals website under Division of Professions and Occupations within DORA. We're showing it now, but everything related to rulemaking will be under the Public Notices tab. You can see it right there under Program Information. So that's where the recording of today's meeting will be posted, the draft rules, the legislation, any additional meetings will be noticed there, sent out to everyone on our stakeholder list. Let's see. Eric Freed, where in the law or the rules does it charge my inspectors with the requirement to check radon professional licenses rather than DORA enforcing its rules? Hopefully we were able to talk about that and how DORA is complaint driven, and then will enforce the rules as complaints are received. Jeanette Whitcomb here at the City of Aspen, our building department will take this outreach on and work on verification on licensure once it has been adopted. We can add this to our local newsletter to the development community. Our inspectors do inspections on the system. Crystal Little already said this, but just going to reiterate, we met with the Home Builders Association and worked with them on this bill. They're working on sharing the news with the builders as well. Sean Williams, are there any requirements for measurement licensing outside of NRPP, NRSB certification, background information, and liability insurance? Victoria Cardona, is there a list of cities or counties that follow Appendix F? If anyone wants to weigh in on any of those questions, I'm going to jump to Russell LaPlante, the hand raised. We should be able to hear you.
Yes, so I'm actually president of the InterNACHI Colorado chapter, and we have a monthly meeting, and I was just wanted to ask and have an open an invite if anybody from your group is willing to join us at our meeting. It's in the evening, second Tuesday of the month, mainly so that I'm not reiterating something incorrectly. I'm not sure if somebody in your group is willing to do this, but I think it would be appreciated by the inspection industry if someone could attend. I know I asked this via email, but I did not hear a response.
Okay. And you sent that to the rulemaking inbox?
I believe, no, I don't think I sent it to the rulemaking.
Okay. You're welcome to follow up. If it wasn't sent to rulemaking, that's probably the best place to send any inquiries like that as they relate to this implementation. And that's the email address that is listed on our notice, and then we would follow up with you there.
Where is that listed?
So on the notice for today's meeting, and I can say it's Dora_DPO_rulemaking@state.co.us, and we can drop that in the chat as well.
Yeah, that would be appreciated.
All right. And then Douglas Clatter, actually I missed a comment. Don Humphrey, what will happen with the system installed before 7/1 that become part of a complaint? Is there a grandfather clause? So the jurisdiction for DORA will begin as the legislature allowed it. So there's no grandfather clause for that. And then Douglas Clatter, as NRPP or NRSB create new certifications, will this require legislative revision, or will the director be able to make the recognition of a new credential such as for new construction? So it depends on how the statute was written. I'd have to take a closer look at what the statute says about the standards. And then of course, if, like I mentioned earlier, if a standard or guideline is incorporated in rule by reference and that changes, then there would have to be an update to the rule because of the legislation, or sorry, because of the statute around incorporation by reference. Douglas Clatter, I see that your hand is raised. You're self-muted. We should be able to hear you.
Yeah, follow up to my written question. The new certifications that may come out, or certifications, are really more of a policy aspect of the proficiency programs rather than that which is written into a specific standard as are cited.
Okay.
So
I see what you're
separate. It's separate from the standards, which are more how to do it, as opposed to the programmatic things that either one of these agencies have.
Okay. And again, I'd have to look and see how the statute was written. I don't recall off the top of my head, but for certifications.
Yeah, because the reason I raised this, there's a lot of discussion about new construction, and typically a person who becomes certified, and say if you recognize the Radon professional or specialist, is essentially a 5-day program that a flat worker or somebody involved in new construction doesn't need necessarily a 5-day education program to lay down poly. So I see what possibly may be happening is a more focused credential, and then how does that get recognized by DORA for this new construction issue? I think that's going to be one of the gnarliest ones that you deal with. So I toss that out there for consideration of how new credentials can meet the intent of the legislation rather than having to go back to the legislature. And that is a credential that's focused on the task that's being within the scope of that license. Thank you.
Thank you. And then it looks like we've gotten through everyone. I just want to go back to Russell LaPlante again. I see that your hand is still raised. I want to make sure that we heard from you. So you're unmuted. We should be able to hear you.
I did not mean to leave that open.
No problem. All right. So at this point, we're just past 11:30. I want to make sure that, like I said, we're mindful of people's time. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the meeting. So thank you for attending today's meeting. I appreciate the comments from all involved and the back and forth. I think it was helpful to have that open conversation. Stakeholders will have another opportunity to provide comments and or testimony at the permanent rulemaking hearing, which is tentatively scheduled for May 2nd, 2022. I think that just seeing the engagement from people today will determine whether it would be best to have another stakeholder meeting before that rulemaking hearing. We didn't get we didn't get a lot of feedback regarding the proposed new rules. So if people have comments on the rule language, whether there should be any changes to that language, please submit that to the rulemaking inbox that was provided in the chat and that we mentioned a couple of times today. But I do think it was helpful to have the other comments that were received. All of those and the program recommendations will be provided to the director for review before the director considers permanent adoption of the rules. And if another stakeholder meeting does get scheduled before that permanent rulemaking hearing, we will send it out to the same list of people that received it for today. And then again, everything will always be published on our website under the public notices tab. So continue to check that for updates. That concludes this stakeholder meeting, and we thank you again for your participation.